Across different regions of the world, the language of ceasefires, sanctions, and diplomacy is increasingly colliding with the realities of geopolitical competition and strategic pressure. In the Middle East, Lebanon is no longer viewed merely as a border confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, but as a central piece in the wider calculations surrounding the evolving negotiations between Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, Cuba is facing one of the most intense phases of American pressure in years as the Trump administration escalates economic and political measures in what may describe as an attempt to reshape the regional balance near U.S. shores. From Beirut to Havana, questions are emerging about deterrence, influence, and the limits of pressure in an increasingly fragmented international order. But are these crises moving towards containment or towards a new phase of escalation? I'm Hana Al-Hamalawi. Welcome to In Focus. Israeli airstrikes intensified across southern and eastern Lebanon, despite growing optimism surrounding a possible U.S.-Iran agreement that could reduce regional tensions. According to The Guardian, Lebanese state media reported casualties following strikes targeting multiple areas, while Israeli officials said that the operations were aimed at Hezbollah positions. The escalation comes even as diplomatic efforts continue to revive ceasefire arrangements and broader regional negotiations. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem expressed cautious hope that a potential U.S.-Iran understanding could eventually calm the Lebanese front, but violence on the ground has continued. Reports indicate that more than 3,000 people have been killed in Lebanon since the latest round of fighting began earlier this year, with repeated exchanges raising fears of a wider regional confrontation despite ongoing mediation efforts. To discuss the latest developments surrounding the Lebanon-Israel confrontation, the implications of the extended ceasefire, and also the growing connection between the Lebanese front and the ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiations, we're joined from Cairo by writer and political analyst Mr. Abdullah Nama. Mr. Nama, thank you so much for joining us here. Welcome to In Focus. Let's get to the point now. Despite the extension of the ceasefire, Israel has approved plans to continue military operations in Lebanon. How should this decision be interpreted politically and also militarily?
Good morning to you and to everyone who's watching us today. Actually, I think that what's happening in southern Lebanon between Lebanon and Israel, I don't think that Israel will be decreasing the number of operations or the intensity, and this is something that Netanyahu actually said. He said that the Lebanese front has nothing to do with the negotiations going on between the U.S. and Iran, and he also said that he has agreed with Donald Trump to do anything that he sees fit in Lebanon so as to protect Israel's interests. And so I think that actually the agreement between Iran between the U.S. and wasn't signed, and it won't be until the Lebanese delegation goes to the U.S. Next Friday. And Israel won't stop at least until then, because they have the green light and they have some kind of a cover from the U.S. and I don't think that Lebanon will allow any other country to negotiate on its behalf, and they want to be there themselves. And so this is why negotiations have been stalling, and this is why Naim Qassem has said that he'll be bringing the Lebanese regime down, and that they are now normalizing relations with Israel, and that and then he also talked about the disarmament of Hezbollah. But actually his statements were kind of crazy, saying that the Lebanese government has committed some kind of treason, and that they are siding with Israel, or as I said, normalizing relationships with Israel now. That was such a crazy statement, everything that he said basically. And the negotiations between the US and Iran don't include the Lebanese front as it used to, and this is because of the US cover that Israel has, as I mentioned. And so far the supreme leader, or the Iranian supreme leader, is also or can't be detected. And so this is why Iran has been claiming that, or this is the reason that Iran claims is hindering the negotiations, which is actually not logical. And so I think that they are just trying to hide the fact that Lebanon is now not included in, or the Lebanese front is now not included in the negotiations.
So apart from the statements, sir, let's put the statements apart. Do you think that the Lebanese front effectively has become part of the broader US-Iran negotiating track rather than separate conflict arena?
Yeah, definitely. The Lebanese government is negotiating with the U.S. and actually the U.S. doesn't want any other country negotiating on Lebanon's behalf, and this is something that they have talked about more than once. And the Lebanese government itself does not accept this. And as you know, there have been calls when they signed some initial agreements, and actually lots of countries have been in contact with the US also to not have any or not to sign any agreement with Iran that includes Lebanon, because Lebanon doesn't want any country negotiating on its behalf, as I mentioned. And but actually Iran has been using the Lebanese file, but they said that the reason the negotiations have been hindered is because they cannot find their supreme leader. But they have said that Lebanon will be included in the agreement, which is something that Israel won't accept either way. Israel thinks that they are defending themselves, or they claim so, and so they won't accept Lebanon being included in the negotiations between the U.S. or any agreement between the U.S. and Iran. And as you know, lots of the Lebanese people now think that Iran doesn't have their backs anymore, doesn't have Lebanon's back. And so I think that the main problem here is that unfortunately Lebanon is facing challenges, but they are also trying to work towards the right path. And just yesterday we've seen the foreign minister in the U.S. saying that the U.S. supports the Lebanese government and having the Lebanese government stay in office. And so that was some kind of a response to Naim Qasim's statement after saying that he will be bringing the regime down. And as I said, that was such a crazy statement, and he keeps saying that the government is betraying them now, and so they'll be taking matters into their own hand. There'll be reconstruction the south, but actually nothing of the sort has happened. Almost 100 towns in southern Lebanon have been completely destroyed. People have no food, nowhere to shelter, and the south is still occupied, by the way. And so I don't think where we're heading after this, but and so as I said, I don't think that Naim Qasim's statement is any good actually, and everything that he said just yesterday is a proof that he cannot do anything about this.
Why is Israel increasingly concerned about potential American-Iranian understandings regarding Lebanon and Hezbollah?
Actually, Israel thinks that since the agreement between Iran and the U.S. will include the Lebanese front, then Israel considers this as they don't accept this actually because they don't want to feel like Iran has Lebanon's fate, because if they were to negotiate on Lebanon's behalf, or if they can get the war to end there, then that means that Iran's proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, I mean, will still be going strong and won't be disarming anytime soon. They would see this as Hezbollah holding on to their arms, and Lebanon having another strong country to have its back. But actually, this is something that Israel doesn't want. They want to go deeper into the south. They want to have, or they want to displace more civilians, have them sheltering in schools and tents and so on. And actually, Naim Qassem doesn't care as well. He just wants to stay in control. He wants to make sure that Hezbollah won't be disarmed, and that Hezbollah will be keeping up its military operations against Israel. And so he doesn't really care about the civilians that were displaced or even killed as well. And but this is something that Israel won't accept as well. They won't accept Hezbollah keeping its arms. And now after we've seen Netanyahu not accepting Iran's influence going strong over Lebanon, this is something that they cannot accept. And by the way, the US doesn't like this either, and this is why Naim Qassem attacked the Lebanese government and the president just yesterday in yesterday's statement, and this is why the U.S. foreign minister had to respond. And so, yeah, I think that the Iranian file will be, or the Iranian nuclear file especially, will be discussed in 60 days. So this means that they have come to terms regarding this, and now the main issue, or the sticking point, is the Lebanese front. But they are waiting for the supreme leader, who has actually disappeared, and this is something that I don't really buy or don't really believe. And
Sir, the Israeli officials said that they feel sidelined in the current negotiations between Washington and Tehran. How serious is this claim inside Israel's political and security establishment? Is Israel aligning itself from the negotiations, or it is being sidelined by the U.S. administration?
Israel doesn't want to reach an agreement, or they don't want Iran and the U.S. to reach an agreement if it doesn't include the nuclear program, and it has to be on Israel's terms. This is something that Israel feels threatened by. And then also their second sticking point is Hezbollah's disarmament. And so these two conditions, if these two conditions are not included in the U.S.-Iranian agreement, then I think that Israel will be intensifying its strikes on the south, and maybe they'll so, as I said, if the negotiations don't go according to Israel's condition, and they don't happen on their terms, then Israel will be going deeper into the south. As you know, they're already taking over towns and occupying towns, destroying them. They have around 55 towns in southern Lebanon now, which they now call a buffer zone. 55 towns that have been completely destroyed, and all the civilians have been displaced. And so, yeah, as I said, if they don't reach an agreement on their terms, they'll be going deeper and occupying even more countries. And they have actually just earlier today, they sent warnings and flyers for the civilians to evacuate new towns. And so this means that they're going deeper into Lebanon. They are actually achieving their plan, destroying towns, taking more and more of Lebanon to achieve this greater Israel project, or a plan that they are working towards. And the ceasefire that has been in place hasn't been of any use. Actually, Israel is still carrying out its operations and going deeper into Lebanon, occupying more towns and destroying them. And so Israel actually won't settle for an agreement that doesn't include the disarmament of Hezbollah, or even eradicating Hezbollah as a concept. And I think that, as I mentioned, this is the sticking point. And as for the nuclear program, it is clear that, or according to the statements, it seems that they'll be resolving the nuclear program in about 60 days, and I think that they won't allow Iran to have a nuclear program, and so I think that they are focusing on the Lebanese condition or the Lebanese front,
Yes,
and I
well,
think
I'd
that
like to thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah Nema, political analyst, for your thoughtful insights and for your analysis. Thank you so much, sir. As pressure and deterrence continue to reshape the Middle East, another confrontation is intensifying much closer to American shores, where Cuba is facing one of the most severe phases of political and economic pressure in recent years, amid growing geopolitical competition involving Washington, Beijing, and regional influence in the Caribbean. The Wall Street Journal opinion segment examines the Trump administration's escalating pressure campaign against Cuba, framing it as part of a broader effort to weaken Havana politically and economically. The discussion highlights new sanctions targeting Cuban military-linked businesses, legal actions tied to confiscated U.S. properties, and growing rhetoric from President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The report argues that Washington sees Cuba as increasingly vulnerable amid economic crisis, fuel shortages, and declining foreign support. It also notes concerns over Cuba's ties with China and Russia, which U.S. officials portray as a growing security challenge in the Western Hemisphere. And to discuss the recent escalation between the United States and Cuba, the impact of Washington's pressure campaign, and also the growing role of China in Havana's strategic calculations, we're now joined from Buenos Aires by political analyst and international relations researcher, Mr. Tobias Belgrano. Thank you so much, Mr. Belgrano, for joining us here in this edition of In Focus. Now, the Trump administration has sharply escalated pressure on Cuba since the beginning of 2026. What fundamentally changed in Washington's approach towards Havana?
Well, the approach again of the U.S. administration against Havana during the Trump years was always of an aggressive nature. I mean, always the Trump administration, this administration and the first administration was very aggressive to the Cuban regime. Especially, it was a change after the Obama administration, where the idea was to close ties with Cuba and finish the old resentments. Well, Trump has expanded the Helms-Burton law, which is the blockade against Cuba, with an oil embargo, which in the Caribbean it's a very sensitive, especially in Caribbean nations, it's a very sensitive matter as they are energy dependent from the U.S. or from foreign exporters, generally the U.S. This affects a lot the quality of life in the island, which was already in a very hard place after the pandemic, because tourism is one of its most important economic activities, and it was really effective during and after the pandemic. So the quality of life in Cuba was already on a hard place, and the Trump administration decided to address its strategy in a more aggressive way, doing an embargo on energy resources, which are one of the most key elements to assure or ensure the quality of life in a Caribbean nation, in this case Cuba. So the U.S. Has expanded its tactics against the island, with the traditional idea of toppling down the regime and causing internal revolution that topples down the regime, or going through a regime change, as they try to do in Iran or in Venezuela also.
Well, many analysts say that the United States is attempting to reproduce the Venezuela model in Cuba. Do you agree with this assessment?
No, I wouldn't agree, because the regimes are different in nature. I mean, the Cuban regime, it was a communist revolution that started in the 60s, and there's no real opposition as in the case of Venezuela. I mean, in Venezuela, the regime had a real opposition, had a political opposition were well known. Maria Corina Machado had won the elections the year before after the fraud of Maduro. I mean, there are key differences in the Venezuelan regime and the Cuban regime that make it very difficult to do a regime change. However, there's also the possibility, which are a lot talking about, of doing the change of asking la familia of the Castro family, which is Raúl Guillermo Castro, which is the person who's talking personally with um, with the foreign minister of the U.S. Uh, that he
Secretary
believes
Rubio?
Secretary Rubio. So thank you, Secretary Rubio. That he discusses a new regime or a new economic policy in the island without a regime change, which was the Venezuelan case.
So, why do many observers believe that Cuba is structurally different from Venezuela despite the similarities in American pressure tactics? In addition, of course, to what you have said. I mean, you gave us a historical background. What modern day differences could shape the events now?
Well, the state in Cuba has much more power than in Venezuela. I mean, in Venezuela, there's an economy which is not as controlled, what was not as controlled as the Cubans. The Cubans also don't have, as I was mentioning, don't have real opposition. And in recent days, which is one of the reasons that the
But this
U.S.
part
is.
of the opposition, Mr. Bergano, could also be influenced by U.S. pressure. I mean, the U.S. played a role in Venezuela in this regard. Don't you agree?
Yes, I mean the possibility of having a puppet regime, which
Yes.
is helpful to the U.S. with a member of the Castro family, for example, to pursue that process. It's not impossible. However, I think that the Cuban regime, which was what I was about to say, has some dissuasive strategies to pursue any kind of aggression of the U.S., which is, for example, the drone program they have recently executed from Iran, which involved the importation of drones from Iran that might, for example, have an effect of sending a drone to U.S. territory in the case of an invasion, which is not a military threat in per se. However, the political effect of having Cuba attacking the U.S. or attacking Miami is something that wouldn't be in help for the U.S., especially I mean for the Trump administration, which is trying uh, to enhance its chances in the November election after having to draw back from the Middle East in Iran. Having Cuba attacking Florida would really first, or the MAGA part of the coalition. So attacking Cuba and Cuba attacking the U.S. could be, despite of the non-threat of the attack or only causing minor damages, could really affect the reputation of the U.S. and the strategy of the U.S., especially of the Trump administration, to get better results in the election.
You earlier mentioned the role of U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but I want to know from you, how significant is Rubio's role in shaping the current U.S. strategy towards Cuba?
No, it's completely key. I mean, the key is Marco Rubio generally in this administration. As we know, that we have this differentiation within the group that are considered the neocons and the America Firsts, which are led by J.D. Vance, and for the others are Marco Rubio. He has a personal interest in this because he's a Cuban, from Cuban-born family. He personally also sent videos to the island talking about the possibility of the U.S. government to send the food and to send food to the island and resources to the island, but that were not going to be managed by Gaesa, which is the military company that manages the economy in Cuba. So yeah, I mean, he has a personal interest and a personal role in this. And also, as I was saying, after with the drawback from the Middle East for Trump administration, I think Cuba, at least from a symbolic standpoint, is something that the U.S. might be interested in pursuing a regime change, especially for electoral causes.
Okay. Strategic minerals such as nickel and cobalt are increasingly part of the discussion here. So, how important is the geopolitical competition, of course, with China in this crisis?
Well, I do think that China has its interest in minerals in Cuba. However, I don't think they don't. I don't believe Beijing would risk a confrontation, a direct confrontation or a confrontation with the U.S. or tensions with the U.S., especially after the summit they had recently. I think the actor which is more interested in the Cuban situation are the Russians. I mean, from a traditional standpoint, from a geopolitical standpoint, Cuba has helped them to run its operations in Latin America, especially the media operations that the Russians do in Latin America from Cuba. So, and also from a geopolitical standpoint, it's key to have an actor so close to the U.S. as none of the other countries in the region have. Of the other powers have as China. So, having Cuba, I think it's more key for Russia, despite the Chinese are interested in the minerals. But I think that. It's not as significant as other mineral providers from the world to the Chinese.
Speaking of China, China has expanded food aid and economic cooperation with Cuba amid severe shortages and blackouts. Is Beijing here trying to become Havana's primary strategic lifeline?
Well, yes, but I think that also the key, for example, I mean, it's not only China who's playing this game. I mean, Brazil in Brazil and Mexico also try to help to help Cuba with resources, with food also and aid. Even Chile, in a moment, tried to pursue that strategy, but also Russia with the oil tankers that were helping the Cuban regime to have some aid in the critical moment. So I think not only China is trying to address this role, but also there are many actors that are trying to show their solidarity with the island in this particular moment.
So, how deeply is the ongoing fuel blockade affecting Cuban society, universities, state institutions on a daily basis?
No, completely. It's destroying the quality of life in the island. I mean, the problems were already structural due to the currency reunification a few years ago, which affected a lot the economy. And after this oil blockade, you don't have public transportation. There are blackouts that last many hours. People are not able to get fresh food. No public transportation is moving in the island. There are no cars moving in the island, so that also affects tourism, which is a key activity in Cuba for cars that move around the tourists. I mean, hotels are not able to keep their lights on. Yeah, it's a complete problem, and it also affects food distribution, which is one of the main problems that the Cubans are having. So without food distributions, the food is stocked in only in the countryside or in the big city. We receive these resources from abroad, so it affects completely the normal life of the Cubans.
Looking ahead, do you expect a prolonged phase of economic pressure and containment, or could the situation eventually push both sides towards indirect negotiations?
I think the second scenario is more probable. That there's an actor that allows the U.S. to reduce the pressure, and by accepting a little economic reform, not a lot of economic reforms. But I don't believe there's going to be a regime change in Cuba, a complete regime change in Cuba. I see that they might negotiate with someone in the Castro family, as Marco Rubio is talking to Raúl Guillermo Castro, which is the grandson of Raúl Castro. Sorry, which was also pressured personally by his arrest order by the U.S. from the attacks from some planes 30 years ago. So, and this caused a lot of solidarity among the Cubans that went to do a protest against the U.S. embassy, attack against these attacks on Raúl Castro and the Castro family.
Mr. Tobias Belgrano, thank you so much for your thoughtful insights and, of course, valuable perspective. Thank you so much, sir. Today's discussions highlighted how regional crises are increasingly shaped by geopolitical rivalries and shifting international calculations. In Lebanon, ceasefire efforts remain fragile amid deterrence and also mistrust, while in Cuba, economic pressure and geopolitical competition are reshaping a long-standing confrontation. From the Middle East to the Caribbean, the balance between negotiation and escalation continues to define an uncertain global landscape. I'm Helen Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching In Focus. Stay tuned for more updates and analysis here on Q News.